They promised absence would make the heart grow fonder. They never warned us it could make a lover grow. The click of Charlie's suitcase latch in the hallway was the sound of a chapter closing. For 3 months, Hannah had rehearsed this moment. The flying leap into his arms, the tearful, laughing kiss. But when the door actually opened, the man standing there was both achingly familiar and a complete stranger. He was Charlie, but he was also the man from pixelated video calls, his voice slightly out of sync with his smile. That first night was a masterpiece of awkwardness. They moved around each other in the kitchen like polite roommates, the conversation stilted, punctuated by, "So, how was your flight?" And, "Did you remember to water the ficus?" The distance hadn't ended. It had simply shape-shifted. In bed, lying side by side in the dark, the space between them felt vast enough to hold an ocean. Hannah listened to the rhythm of his breathing, a rhythm she once knew as well as her own, and now it felt like listening to a stranger. The silence wasn't peaceful. It was a loud, screaming void where all their unsaid fears lived. "Do you still love me? Do I still know you? Who are we now?" The chapter of distance was over. The harder chapter, the one of rebuilding a shared language, had just begun on a foundation of terrifying quiet. We couldn't find our way back to each other in the present, so we went hunting for us in the past. The tension was a third person in the apartment, suffocating and thick. A week after his return, Hannah couldn't stand another silent dinner. Without a word, she marched to the storage closet and dragged out a dust-covered cardboard box marked memorabilia. "Help me," was all she said. Charlie, confused, joined her on the living room floor. The first artifact was a movie ticket stub, so faded the title was illegible. "Our first date," Hannah said, her voice softer. "You spilled an entire soda in your lap during the previews." A ghost of a smile touched Charlie's lips. "And you pretended not to notice for the whole film." Next came a photo from a friend's wedding, Charlie dipping Hannah on the dance floor, her face alight with unbridled joy. Then, a pressed flower from a hike, a ridiculous love note on a napkin. They weren't just looking at objects, they were conducting an archaeology of their own joy. As they pieced together the story of them, the inside jokes, the shared triumphs, the survived disasters, the man on the floor stopped being the recent stranger and started realigning, memory by memory, with the Charlie she had missed so desperately. They weren't living in the past. They were using it as a compass to navigate back to each other in a disorienting present. We agreed to ask the dangerous questions. The rules were simple: be honest or be destroyed. Talking about the past was safe. Talking about the 3 months apart was a minefield. They tiptoed around it until Charlie, one night over a bottle of wine, proposed a dangerous game. 3 questions each, he said, his eyes serious in the candlelight. No editing. No saving face. Hannah felt a thrill of fear. This was the vulnerability gamble. She went first. "What was the hardest part over there that you didn't tell me?" Charlie looked into his glass. The loneliness wasn't the worst part. The worst part was the relief. Relief at not having to coordinate, compromise, or report in. And then hating myself for feeling that relief. The admission hung in the air, brutal and honest. Hannah's heart ached, but she didn't look away. It was her turn. He asked, "What did you convince yourself was true about me when I was gone?" She swallowed. "That you'd gotten used to a world that didn't include me. That you were happier in your sleek, quiet, solo life." The tears came then, for both of them. But they weren't tears of defeat. They were tears of release. In exposing their darkest, quietest fears to the light, the fears lost some of their power. They had just handed each other live grenades of truth, and instead of pulling the pin, they had chosen to disarm them together. Our therapist said to relearn touch. So we scheduled it, like a dentist appointment. It was awkward, clinical, and it saved us. After the raw honesty of the game, they felt both closer and more fragile. Intellectual reconnection was one thing, physical reconnection was another. Their hugs were stiff, their goodnight kisses perfunctory. Following a piece of advice, they instituted the touch truce at 6:07 p.m. every evening, The odd minute made it feel like theirs. For 7 minutes, all technology off, no talking about logistics. Just touch. The first night, Charlie simply held Hannah's hand as they sat on the couch, both staring straight ahead, feeling ridiculous. The second night, he stood behind her at the sink and rested his hands on her shoulders. She tensed, then slowly melted. On the fourth night, Hannah, feeling brave, laid her head in his lap. His hand, tentative at first, began to stroke her hair. It wasn't passion, it was patience. It wasn't about arousal, it was about attention. They were relearning the topography of each other, the curve of a shoulder, the texture of hair, the steady beat of a pulse under skin. The scheduled touch began to create a new, safe rhythm. Their bodies, which had learned to live without the other, were slowly, nervously, remembering what it meant to be home. We finally had the big fight. We threw every accumulated resentment on the table. And that's when we found the blueprint for our new language. Inevitably, the truce broke. It was over something stupid, a comment Charlie made about how Hannah had reorganized the kitchen drawers in his absence. "I can't find anything anymore," he grumbled. Something in Hannah snapped. 3 months of solo responsibility, of missing him, of holding everything together, erupted. "Maybe if you were here you'd know where things were," she shouted. Old, tired accusations flew. But then, mid-sentence, Hannah stopped. She saw the shut-down look on Charlie's face, the same look he had on their grainy video calls. She took a breath, changed her weapon. "When you criticize the home I kept running, it makes me feel like my effort was invisible," she said, her voice shaking but clear. Charlie paused, thrown. The old script demanded he defend himself. The new, raw honesty from their game called for something else. "I'm not criticizing you," he said, forcing calm. "I'm just disoriented. I feel like a guest. My intention wasn't to hurt you. It was to say, I feel lost." The fight didn't evaporate, but it transformed. They were no longer adversaries trying to win points. They were two people, clumsily translating their hurt from different dialects of pain into a new, shared language of need. For the first time, an argument didn't create more distance. It became a bridge. We realized we couldn't just repair the old relationship. The distance had broken it. So we decided to build a brand new one. In the calm after the storm, they had a profound realization. Trying to go back to the before was impossible. That couple hadn't survived the 3-month test. The choice was to mourn that loss or to become architects of something new. On a Sunday morning, Hannah taped a massive sheet of butcher paper to the wall. "The next us," she wrote at the top. "What do we want to be?" It started slowly, then built momentum. "Adventure Sundays," Charlie said, writing it down. "Real talk check-ins every Tuesday, no distractions," Hannah added. "Take that pottery class we always joked about. Cook one new, ridiculously complicated recipe together a month." They dreamt aloud, their ideas weaving together. This wasn't a fantasy list. It was a concrete blueprint for a shared future they were both excited about. The energy in the room fizzed with creation, not repair. They were no longer two people trying to glue together a broken vase. They were collaboratively throwing a new, unique piece of pottery on the wheel, their hands muddy and joined in the effort. The silence used to scream. Now it's where we go to listen to everything we've rebuilt. Months later, the test came. Charlie's phone buzzed with a work call, a problem from his time away, pulling him back into that old, separate world. Hannah watched as his posture stiffened, his face slipping into the focused, distant mask of Project Charlie. The old fear flickered in her chest. He's leaving again. But Charlie finished the call, put the phone down, and walked across the room.
He didn't speak.
He simply wrapped his arms around Hannah, his forehead dropping to her shoulder with a weight that was both heavy and trusting. She held him, her chin resting on his head. No words were needed. The silence that enveloped them was profoundly different from the one on that first night. That silence had been empty, echoing with everything that was missing. This silence was full. It was saturated with the shared memories they'd excavated, the hard truths they'd survived, the new rituals they'd created, and the future they were actively building. It was a sanctuary they had built together, brick by vulnerable brick. In that quiet, they both knew they hadn't just closed the distance. They had transformed the space between them from a terrifying chasm into the very thing that held them, strong and sure, together. They say you can never go back. But what if going forward, hand in hand, is infinitely better? The final test didn't come with drama. It came on a Tuesday. Rain lashed against the windows, and Hannah was elbow-deep in flour, attempting the ridiculously complicated recipe from their blueprint, a chocolate soufflé that currently looked more like a geologic disaster. Charlie was at the table, sketching ideas for their upcoming adventure Sunday, his brow furrowed in concentration. The silence was comfortable, knit together by the patter of rain and the soft scratch of his pencil. Then his phone vibrated. Not the casual buzz of a text, but the insistent, pulsing ring of a video call. He glanced at the screen, and Hannah saw it, the flicker. The brief, instinctive flash of the man who lived in a separate, professional world. The man from the distance. Her heart gave a single, hard thump. The old script, she thought. He'll take it in the other room. His voice will get that clipped efficient tone. He'll leave me here, in our world, while he goes back to his. But Charlie didn't move. He held her gaze across the flour-dusted kitchen, and in his eyes, she saw a conscious choice being made. He swiped to answer, but then he did something extraordinary. He turned the phone around, pointing the camera not at his face, but at the scene before him. At Hannah, covered in flour, at the chaotic kitchen, at the cozy storm-lit heart of their home. "Hey, Mark," Charlie said, his voice warm and present, his arm extended. "You're on speaker. Just in the middle of a critical culinary rescue operation with my co-pilot." On the tiny screen, his old colleague's face blinked, surprised, then broke into a grin. "Whoa. Sorry to interrupt. That looks flammable." Charlie laughed, a real, easy sound. "It's a work in progress. What's up?" He kept the phone pointed at their life, his free hand reaching out to dust a smudge of flour from Hannah's cheek. It wasn't a performance. It was an integration. For 2 minutes, Charlie handled the work question, his answers sharp and professional, yet his entire physical reality was rooted in the kitchen with her. He never left. When he hung up, he simply tossed the phone aside, rolled up his sleeves, and said, "Okay, co-pilot. The recipe says fold gently. This looks like you're trying to punch it into submission. Let me show you." In that moment, Hannah understood everything. The distance was truly gone. Not because he was physically here, but because he had willingly, joyfully, torn down the final wall between his worlds. He had invited his past right into the messy, beautiful center of their present. Later, with 2 miraculously risen soufflés on the table, lopsided but proud, they sat in the glow of candlelight. The silence returned, but it was the deepest, most profound sound she had ever heard. It was the silence of a finished symphony, of a puzzle whose final piece had clicked into place. Charlie reached across the table, his fingers intertwining with hers, their joined hands resting on the blueprint for the next us, now splattered with chocolate and rain. "It's better," he said softly, his thumbs stroking her knuckle. She didn't need to ask what he meant. She felt it in her bones. The intimacy they had now wasn't a repaired version of the old one. It was stronger, wiser, and more resilient. It had been forged in the fire of absence and cooled in the patient waters of choice. It had scars, but the scars were part of the story, and they loved the whole story. The old intimacy was a beautiful, fragile house they'd inherited. The distance had burned it down. What stood in its place wasn't a replica. It was a fortress they had designed together, stone by stone, with wider windows to let the light in, and a single, unshakable foundation, the conscious, daily choice of us. The silence didn't just hold them now. It sang their song. The greatest intimacy isn't found in never being apart. It's built in the brave, deliberate work of coming back together and discovering that what you rebuild isn't what you lost. It's what you were always meant to become. They thought the story ended when they found each other again. But that was just the preface. 1 year to the day after Charlie's return, Hannah woke to an empty bed and sunlight painting a diamond on her pillow. No note. Just the faint, lingering scent of his coffee and something else, the electric stillness of a planned surprise. Her phone chimed once. Charlie, wear shoes you can walk in.
And trust me.
A laugh bubbled up, unrestrained. This was the language they'd built, a lexicon of anticipation, written in the margins of their blueprint. She dressed, her pulse alight, hopeful drum against her ribs. He was waiting at the front door, 2 backpacks at his feet, his eyes holding the same thrilling, boyish mischief she'd fallen in love with a decade ago, but now layered with the deep, earned certainty of the man who had chosen her, again and again, in the quiet aftermath. Adventure Sunday, he said, handing her a pack. Phase 2. He drove them out of the city, the landscape melting from concrete to green. They didn't turn into a park or a trailhead. Instead, Charlie pulled up to a small, regional airport where a single, tiny Cessna plane sat on the tarmac, gleaming in the morning light. Hannah stopped, her breath catching. Charlie, what is this? The first item on the Nexus blueprint, he said, taking her hand. Annual mystery trip. No questions. Just presence. The flight was a hum of engine and held hands. They soared over patchwork fields and winding rivers, the world below reduced to a beautiful, miniature map of their journey. Then the pilot banked, and a coastline appeared, rugged and wild, cradling a secluded crescent of beach. They landed on a small airstrip where a single jeep waited. The final destination was a lighthouse, perched on a dramatic, windswept cliff, its white stone blazing against the blue endlessness of sky and sea. Charlie led her to the base of the lighthouse, where a picnic was laid out on a blanket. But it was what sat beside the food that made Hannah's heart stutter, a simple, beautiful leather-bound notebook. On its cover, embossed in gold, were their initials and a title, The Unwritten Chapter. We spent so long excavating our past and drafting our future, Charlie said, his voice soft against the crash of waves below. But I realized the most important part isn't the map. It's the log of the journey, the daily, ordinary, extraordinary moments that are the intimacy. She opened the book. The first page was blank, pristine. The second page held a single, stunning photograph from last month. The two of them, caught in a laugh during their disastrous pottery class, covered in wet clay, their eyes crinkled with pure, unself-conscious joy. Beneath it, in Charlie's handwriting, the day we made a lopsided bowl and a perfect memory. He'd already begun. He'd been documenting their new language, the 6:07 p.m. touches that had become unprompted embraces, the real talk, check-ins that had evolved into seamless understanding, the silly and sublime moments of their co-created life. This, he said, tapping the blank first page, is for today. And this, he gestured to the rest of the empty book, is for all our tomorrows. We write it together, not with plans, but with proof. Hannah looked from the book to the wild horizon, to the man before her. The distance was not a memory to be overcome. It was the contrasting shadow that made this present light so brilliant. The silence between them wasn't just peaceful now, it was pregnant. It hummed with the potential of every page yet to be filled, every mystery trip yet to be taken, every quiet morning and stormy argument and hard-won laughter still to come. They had not simply rebuilt a bridge over a chasm. They had built a new continent entirely, and they were its first explorers, its cartographers, its authors. The old story of loss and return was closed. This was something new. This was an ongoing, ever-unfolding discovery. Charlie handed her a pen. The wind turned the blank pages, a whisper of invitation. Where do we begin? She asked, her eyes shining. He smiled, a smile that held their entire history and all their tomorrows. We already have. The most powerful intimacy isn't a destination you finally reach. It's the blank page you dare to start writing together, every single day, forever. The greatest love story isn't the one that survives the distance. It's the one that learns to build a home inside the space between two hearts. The lighthouse stood behind them, a silent witness against the bruising purple of twilight. The leather-bound book, The unwritten chapter lay between them on the blanket, its pages still mostly empty, a promise in the gathering dark. But Charlie wasn't looking at the book or the horizon. He was looking at her face, illuminated by the first bold star overhead. "I used to think love was a fortress," he said, his voice barely louder than the surf below. "Something to build high and strong to keep the world out. I was so focused on the walls, I forgot about the door." Hannah watched him, the salt air on her lips, waiting. He reached into his pocket, not for a ring, but for a simple, old-fashioned skeleton key, worn smooth by time. He placed it in her palm and closed her fingers around it. It was warm from his skin. "When I was away, I carried this. It was to my grandfather's cabin, a place that doesn't exist anymore. It was my token of a world that felt solid, permanent." He paused, his gaze unwavering. "I'm giving it to you now, not as a key to a place, but as a symbol. You hold the key to the space between us, Han. Not to lock it down, but to open it up. To decide, every single day, to walk into that uncertain, beautiful space where I exist, and to invite me into yours." The revelation was so profound it felt like stillness. They hadn't erased the distance. They hadn't demolished the space that once terrified them. They had done something far more radical. They had claimed it. That vulnerable, negotiable territory between two separate souls was no longer a no-man's land of fear. It was their most sacred, shared room, a room they chose to enter together, furnished with trust and lit by the deliberate, gentle act of showing up. The intimacy they had now was not a fusion, but a sacred communion. It was the daily, courageous exchange of two unique keys. Hannah leaned forward, her forehead touching his, the key pressed between their hearts. "Then consider this my standing invitation," she whispered. "The door is always open, and I am always home when you walk through it." In that moment, under the infinite sky, their story didn't conclude. It simply settled into its true, everlasting rhythm, the soft, perpetual sound of a door swinging open, again and again, by mutual and joyous consent. Love is not the absence of space. It is the creation of a doorway right in the middle of it. And the most beautiful part is this: you both hold the key.